also just want to welcome everybody and say that I think between the two sessions, I think we have a pretty amazing program, so I'm happy that you can join us. I was telling Matt earlier that I think that we might be getting into what I consider the golden age of recruiting. It may not feel that way when we struggle to get people in, but there's so many resources that are coming out and so many novel approaches and people with such expertise that I think that it's becoming a really interesting time. I actually saw something in the news the other day, and I have copies. Anybody wants them, I'll leave them over there. I print out like 20 copies, but there's an article on getting more people into clinical trials. It was in the Wall Street Journal, which really surprised me because I feel like a few years back I would talk about recruitment to people and their eyes would glaze over as I was talking to them, and they said, yeah, I get it, we'll get it done, and then they wouldn't. So it's interesting. So feel free to grab these, and then I'm going to turn things over to Steve, and he's going to get us started. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So my name is Steve Wong, and I am with Denver Back Pain Specialists. We are a pain management site in Denver, Colorado. And the reason I'm here today is I wanted to speak to you guys a little bit more about my personal experiences with regards to site management and, more importantly, on the patient recruitment side. So before we get too far into it, I just had a few questions for the group. So do me a favor and raise your hand if this is applicable. What percentage of you currently have profit and loss responsibility at the site? And what percentage of you have ever used an outside firm for helping on the patient recruitment side? And does anyone here in the room have their own in-house resources to run their own campaigns? And who uses their CRCs to make recruiting calls? Does anybody have a dedicated recruiter? That's great, that's great. So my last question, how many of you feel that you have visibility into the patient recruitment process? So for example, do you know how many calls they're making a week? How much time they're spending on the phone? And do you know the metrics of your top performers? Great, great. Thank you very much. So before I get too far into it, I just want to give you a little bit more background about myself and when I first started doing trials and the patient recruitment side. So we had a trial and we had estimated X number of recruitments that we would bring in from inside the practice, and as we started getting into it, it looked like we weren't able to meet those numbers. So we had, spent our own money outside of the budget and paid for a firm to come and help us with the enrollment. We paid them a flat rate, and they gave us leads on a monthly basis. And what I did was I used Google Docs spreadsheet, and I was entering in all the leads by hand, copying and pasting them, and everyone would work off of that sheet. So I thought it was a great idea. Google's great, you can have multiple people all at once in there. But one of the things I learned is that if you're trying to do call tracking in Google, it doesn't work very well. You've got people, hitting different cells. People don't understand. They accidentally insert rows, remove rows, and it just became a nightmare. So what I ended up doing myself is I looked at, my own background. I come from the software side, and at one point I was also managing inside sales. So what I did was I tried to take the best of both worlds and basically try to turn this into more of a efficient system that I was used to. And what I noticed is that, when you take some of that element from the non-research side and you blend it into patient recruiting, at least on our side, it ended up working very well. So let me talk to you guys a little bit more about what we did. We ran a 9-month campaign on Facebook. And when I say 9-month campaign, this wasn't a single campaign. What it was actually a series of campaigns. We would go in there, we would split test, we would do things to try to increase that ROI. Chris Gantz is actually going to be speaking later today about split testing as well. So we had 586 total leads in the pipeline. And when I say total leads, that means 586 individual patients who were interested in learning about the trial that gave us their full name, email, and phone number contact. Now, out of that total number of 586, we took in 46 scheduled appointments who actually showed up. And from that 46, we were able to randomize 12 patients. Everyone's got a different trial, and depending on your own particular IE criteria, you're going to do better than me or worse than me when it comes to the randomization side. But what I really wanted to focus was on the top part of that funnel. So what we're going to go through next is the actual advertising ROI. So after a 9-month period, we did the numbers, and it looked like for every dollar that we spent on advertising, we took in $16.50 in revenue. That $16.50 is calculated based on screen failures, randomizations, and I also extrapolated for randomized patients, assuming they completed all visits. The trial's actually still ongoing, so I don't have complete information, and that was about as good as I could get. And I don't know how much time you guys spend on the internet and the marketing side, but I'll give you a few more little nitty-gritty statistics. We ran this campaign, and our budget was about $16K. So from that $16K, we did around $260. Cost per click was $2. So what that means is that for every patient who was interested in clicking the ad and moving forward, there was a $2 fee that we paid. And our cost per lead was around $27.50. So pretty much around, I'd say 1 out of 14 people who actually went to the ad were interested enough in giving us their information. In addition to the $27.50 per lead cost, we ended up spending about $350 per actual patient. Does anyone have any questions so far? Yes.
I always cringe at a metric of a cost per click because on Facebook you can generate so many clicks, and the critical issue is, are they your right patients? And so if you look at the conversion rate from clicks, were they clicking on the ad or were they clicking on an online pre-screener? Because the dropout rate, you first look at impressions, then you look at clicks, then you look at click-through to the online pre-screener, and then the click-through to the completion of the screener, and how many actually met study criteria. So when I look at this number representing a sponsor view, I would question whether or not there were quality screen fails and how much is going out the door that was noise.
Sure.
So if you could just kind of
So with that said, I agree that you can't just focus at the CPC level, and keep in mind that I calculate everything at the end. So I did, in fact, take in every dollar on the Facebook side, and that gross revenue was calculated from the screen failures, the visits. With regards to the conversion rates, obviously it does drop down, and I'll go into that later as well, but from the landing page, I was getting anywhere between 4 to 6% conversion, but that was obviously already from people who hit the Facebook side. So I don't remember the exact numbers, but on a 16K campaign, we had around 30,000 impressions to the landing page, give or take. And from the landing page, that's where we generated the 586 leads, which is how we got to that $27.50 per lead. So, and with that said, one of the things that's important to do is to start off a campaign. Normally we'll start it off with a relatively high budget, and then as we move forward, we'll move that budget up and down until we find that optimal version. I want wanted to give you guys a little bit more insight with regards to our recruitment funnel. So out of that 586, 40% we were able to knock off right off the bat. Out of those screen failures, most of them were easy things that we could, exclude patients based on the IE criteria. There was also a small percentage that were either the wrong fit, didn't want to participate, or lived too far away. However, Facebook does a pretty good job with the targeting, so we didn't get too many of those. The most interesting number that you guys need to see here is that 32% never actually answered or called us back. And these were people that we called back within 24 hours. Some of these were people that we called back after 2 minutes of getting the lead. And we normally try about 8 times before we discard any names. But the reason I'm pointing that out is anyone who really wants to utilize online marketing, they have to understand this is a volume-driven business, and you have to have a large number of leads to work with in the beginning. And when you have more junior CRC staff, they may look at you like you're crazy, like, why is he having me call? 1 out of 3 people aren't coming in. But at the same time, when you move that funnel forward, you'll realize at the end of the day, we got 12 randomized patients, which was about 3/4 of our recruitment commitment, and that was just from this campaign. So it does work as long as your staff is on board, and I'll speak a little bit more about that later as well. So what I'd like to do right now is I'm going to break off from my PowerPoint, and I'm going to give you a little bit of a demonstration with regards to the workflow of what I set up. Perfect. So what you're looking at right now is one of the ads. Perfect. So what you're looking at right now is one of the ads that we were running on Facebook campaign. So the way Facebook works is they will display ads, and depending on whether or not you're viewing from a mobile device or a desktop app, it will display in different ways. So what happens is when the person clicks from the Facebook ad, they're immediately brought to this page, and this is our landing page. With regards to landing pages, the main purpose of using a landing page is to get that person who's interested enough from the Facebook side to give them, give us the contact information so that we can educate them more about the trial. There are 2 different processes, thoughts on landing pages. Some people prefer longer landing pages with screening questionnaires in order to get theoretically more engaged patient. However, on my side, I felt that the shorter forms worked better. We weren't really getting better quality patients with regards to the long forms. One of the things that we also tried from landing pages was using widget with the schedule and call me feature. Because in theory, if you take someone, have them sit through 20 questions, and give us a time to call them back, you think they would be there. However, what we learned is that it didn't work any better, so I just went back to the short form and just relying on driving it through value. So what happens is right now you'll see someone is filling out the information. Steve Smith is interested in the trial, so they're going to go ahead and fill that out. And once they're done with the form submission, what happens is this information gets emailed over to our individual accounts, and depending on if you have multiple CRCs, you can also set up the rules to blast everyone. And in the beginning, this is what we're doing, and we're taking everything, putting it in Google Docs. But then, after a while, as I said, it wasn't working very well. So what I ended up doing is, instead of having everything flow over to Google Docs, we ended up using Salesforce.com. How many of you in the audience are familiar with Salesforce? Great. So what we did was all that information that got inputted in, it would automatically get emailed to us. But on top of that, the information automatically then got imported to the Salesforce.com site. So from here, you'll see this is the dashboard. This is what it looks like when our recruiters go online, and you'll see that Steve Smith is that very first lead. So we're going to go ahead and call that patient back. In addition to the landing page, we also did one more thing, which was we integrated with a program called Ring Central, which provides VoIP. And the reason we did that is because on the Ring Central side, it plays really well with Salesforce. So what happens is there's a desktop VoIP phone, and there's also a phone app. And when you're clicking on the phone number, it'll automatically tie it in and start the record going. And that way, you know, totally helps with regards to keeping that data there and, you know, not losing information on those inbound and outbound calls. And one of the reasons that we went with Ring Central is because a lot of the calls are made outside of the 9 to 5 window, and using Ring Central allowed the CRCs and recruiters to make calls from home, not give out the personal cell phone information, and still keep the identity of the company. So you'll see there on the left side, that pop-up was basically where everyone, you know, can go in and enter their calls. And once that call is completed, at this point, depending on the outcome of the call, what we would do at that point is, you know, either make a note to give them a call back later, or just acknowledge a voicemail was left, or hopefully in the best case scenario, they end up wanting to come in for a screening. And at that point, what we did was we would take the leads and convert them into contacts in Salesforce. So what that does is that lets us know that, okay, this person no longer needs to be contacted, take them out of that calling funnel. And from there, the only piece that we weren't able to integrate in would be our own healthcare EMR. So at this point, I needed to break out of our system and hand enter that data back into our patient scheduler. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk a little bit more about the individual components which I used in order to create the system. One of the best things is if this is something you wanted to do 20 years ago, half the tools that I'm using didn't even exist. And the only people that had the ability to have this type of management were big enterprises in Fortune 500s who were spending money on full-blown ERP systems and using CRM. So what we're going to do now is we're going to focus more on the Facebook side. I'm not going to talk too much about Facebook, but you know, there's a lot of information out there on the web as well on the Facebook side. Also, if you're spending, I don't remember what that threshold is, but after a certain amount of ad spend, you'll get an actual Facebook account manager as well who can give you insight. Can anyone out there tell me the difference between what it's like to run a Facebook campaign versus Google AdWords? Can someone explain the difference? Yes.
I mean, just in my experience, you get a lot more insight into which demographics that you're targeting are actually responding to your advertisements. And I feel Facebook is more in depth in terms of its targeting. Google is not. Google's keyword based and Facebook's demographic and interest based.
Correct, baby. And yes.
Yeah, I would just add to that too, that I think the difference that we found is that you can get really specific about who you target with Facebook, but they're unsolicited ads, right? They just show up. And Google ads, while you can't be as targeted, you're going to, if someone does see your ad, it's usually because they Googled something that's related. So there's a trade-off.
Correct. So on the Google side, there are people who are actively seeking that information. For example, blood pressure, clinical trial Boston, as opposed to Facebook, they're not looking to be solicited. They've agreed to use Facebook, and as part of your user terms and services, Facebook is allowed to serve you ads. So the key is in order for Facebook to work and work well, you really need to understand more about that target demographic. However, even without a lot of insight, there's a lot of basic things that you would normally do. For example, you can easily just segment out the zip codes that are near your practice. You can select ages, male, female, and that's usually a good way to start. So what happens on Facebook side is you can display your ad to as many people as you want. However, the key is to contain your costs. So the way to contain your costs is to really understand that group that you're going after. So after the Facebook side, we use the program called Unbounce. Unbounce is how I created my landing page. The biggest reason that we used Unbounce was the fact that it plays very nice and there's the back-end integration with Salesforce. So that way we didn't have to double enter any of the leads. Unbounce has a great user interface. Putting something like that together literally only takes about 30 minutes. Things such as the form fields are drag and drop. We just put it right in the form and run it. One of the only drawbacks with Unbounce is that there's not a lot of reporting. So it'll give you basic information such as conversions, but it doesn't store the data. And by conversions, I mean, for example, in our case, anyone who put in their name, email, and phone and hit submit, that was now counted as a conversion. So on the Salesforce side, just to give you guys a little bit more information, we did not do too much modification from the initial Salesforce.com setup, but Salesforce is one of those tools that there are people out there and their jobs are to do nothing but to manage Salesforce. So it's one of those things where you can go as complicated as you need, but honestly, I was able to just get in there, put in a couple custom fields and run with what I had. So with regards to the VoIP side, as I said, we're using RingCentral, and you don't have to use RingCentral, but for us, it was really helpful to have that tie-in back to Salesforce in order to capture a high number of those inbound and outbound calls. And also, given the fact that we did a lot of recruiting outside of the 9 to 5 window, it was really helpful to be able to have the recruiters call from home and still make it look as if they were calling from the practice phone number. I'm going to go into a little bit more about the actual costs. So for us, we were running this on 3 users. Your Facebook ad costs are going to be variable, just depends on your budget. Unbounce was $100 a month. RingCentral is $150 for 3 users. It's not the cheapest phone system in the world, so what we ended up doing is we deployed a separate phone system outside of the practice phone so that people on the research side were using RingCentral. And then on the Salesforce.com side, it was about $200 a month. Any questions? Perfect, well, thank you very much.